Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of Criminally Human. I am your host, and I hope that each and every one of you are doing well and that you're staying safe. So, now that we've talked about this knife sheath and I've explained touch DNA, I wanted to bring to you some stories that I found of people who have been wrongfully convicted using this same method of testing as Bryan Kohberger. DNA can lie, not because the molecules betray us, but because humans do. Evidence can be planted, transfer can be accidental, and lives can be ruined by a speck of skin that you never knew that you left behind during day-to-day activity. These stories of real people are forensic fairy tales that makes innocent people look guilty. Because in the wrong hands, touch DNA becomes a weapon, not a tool of truth. It is a shortcut to a conviction, and it's actually happening more often than you think. Hang on tight because this one will have your head spinning. On a side note, I wanted to be clear that I'll only be using initials in this video. If you really wanted to research, the information is public, but I'm choosing not to share full names. Why? Because some people do the most and some are just messy for no reason. And the last thing I'm trying to do is to contribute to rumors or make anyone a target. That's not what Criminally Human is about. This channel is for truth, not trauma, for justice, not gossip, and some crazies will run to social media pulling up pictures of these people, the victims, the people's kids, their parents, where they've worked at, and I'm just not contributing to the fuckery. So, yeah, let's get into the video. Shout out to one of my subs for bringing this particular one that I'm about to discuss to my attention. I actually had no idea about this guy. Shout out, girl. Thank you. So let's start with initial LA. This was a homeless man who was in California, and he found himself accused of the brutal murder of a millionaire. And the evidence that they had was his DNA found under the victim's fingernail. It was incredibly persuasive in court. Prosecutors thought that they had their guy, but LA had an airtight alibi. His alibi was he was actually in a hospital bed, heavily intoxicated and monitored by medical staff. So you are asking, how did his DNA get there? The paramedics who treated him had also responded to the murder scene hours later. His skin cells had transferred from the gloves or the equipment, unknowingly tagging him to a crime that he never committed. This man spent almost 5 months in jail before they figured out what happened. And if not for hospital surveillance, LA might still be behind bars. Now, how fucked up is that? Next, we have initials DH. He is a former Oklahoma City police officer who was convicted of multiple counts of sexual assault. So while the crimes he was convicted of were heinous, the touch DNA evidence used in his trial raised controversy. His defense team argued that the trace DNA found on his uniform, particularly on the zipper area, could have come from secondary transfer and not sexual contact. For example, it could have transferred from a victim's hand to his car, then to his clothing, especially after interacting with numerous individuals on duty. That's a crazy story that I don't even want to get into it today. It's just going to mess up my energy. So whether or not you believe that he was guilty, that fact still remains that trace skin cells alone do not tell us how, when, or why, and yet they were part of the proof used to convict. So before we move on and continue, let's move to the science real quick. A Discover magazine feature that was titled How Indirect Transfer is Challenging Forensics. They explained exactly what the problem is. Researchers proved that DNA can transfer indirectly, not from person A to object B directly, but from A to C to B. And this is what I mean. I shake hands with someone who later touches a doorknob. My DNA may end up on that doorknob, even though I've never touched it or let myself in any door that this person has been in. They were explaining how people's DNA were found on objects that they've never seen, and that's how fragile and transferable the evidence can be. Now, similarly, there was a 2020 article in Criminal Legal News called Touch Transfer DNA Remains Misunderstood. It warned against blind trust in skin cell evidence. So the article outlined how some forensic labs failed to disclose how almost invisible the DNA sample actually is, or how many hands could have passed it along. Jurors hear the word DNA and automatically assume guilt, and prosecutors exploit that. But the article emphasizes this one truth: skin cells don't tell a story, they are just fragments of one, and if you're not careful, they will rewrite the wrong ending. Now, let's talk about this gentleman, initials DC. DC is a former Indiana State Police trooper who was wrongfully convicted of murdering his wife and 2 children. Just think about that for a second. Your wife is murdered. The children that you share are murdered. You were accused of causing this. You have no time to grieve. The public is looking at you like, oh my goodness, how could he do this? And you know that you were innocent. This poor man spent 13 years in prison and went through not 1, not 2, but 3 separate trials. In his 3rd trial, new DNA evidence revealed another suspect with the initials CB. His DNA was found on clothing and evidence at the scene, but earlier C's own touch DNA had been used to implicate him. It turned out that investigators and crime scene techs manipulated or misunderstood the evidence. I'm going to go ahead and take manipulated the evidence, and I said what I said. Experts later admitted that the amount of DNA from DC did not match the kind of struggle that was alleged, and that secondary transfer could not be ruled out. This man lost 13 years of his life. And if CB's DNA hadn't have been tested, he might have lost it all behind bars. Now hear what I said. It did not match the kind of struggle that was alleged. Look at Bryan Kohberger in this Idaho 4 case. This is the same playbook with different characters. Now, this touch DNA is so reliable, right? Even if that means using it to clear somebody, you would think, right? Now meet TZ, who spent nearly 50 years, 50, on Florida's death row. His 1975 conviction for the murders of his wife, her parents, and another man had been long criticized. TZ has begged for modern touch DNA testing to re-examine blood evidence and transfer points. Those were technology that it didn't exist at the time of his trial. Yet the prosecutors continue to block these requests. Why? Because if DNA clears him, the entire foundation of their case crumbles, and that's not the justice that they want. They want to preserve their case and keep that conviction. So if this touch DNA is so reliable and it's so accurate and it can send other people away and you rely on it so heavily, why won't y'all just retest TZ and give him what he's asking for? Unless you know that you fucked up and you framed him and you don't want him to be free? Is that what it is? And next on the list, we have initials JR. This was a man who was convicted 3 times for the 1992 rape and murder of an 11-year-old. Despite the presence of DNA that excluded him, that means that there was someone else's DNA that said he could not be this guy. Prosecutors persisted with theories involving contamination, transfer, or unexplained anomalies. His confession, obtained after days of interrogation while he was mentally unwell, was used to override the science. Now peep this. Only after a DNA analysis and legal advocates screamed foul, they got this conviction flag on the play, foul. His conviction was overturned. It was vacated at this point. That man served almost 20 years. It wasn't purely a touch DNA case, but it shows how easily forensic evidence is twisted to serve the narratives and not the truth. We also cannot forget initials JS, who was a teenager in Houston wrongfully convicted in 1999 of rape. The main evidence, DNA that supposedly matched his. Now get this. Years later, analysis revealed that it was a mixture and the lab had misread the results. They misread, my bad, sorry. I said it was your DNA, but it wasn't, and I'm sorry you had to go through all of this. We made a mistake. Though not strictly a touch DNA case, it shows the same trend. Trace DNA is fragile. It is easy to misinterpret and even easier to weaponize. Finally, initial AT. This is a New York man who spent time in jail after his DNA was found on a pew-pew that was disregarded during a robbery. He swore that he had no connection to the crime. It turns out that he had touched the gun months earlier and it had passed through multiple hands since, but his DNA lingered. The court initially thought that they had their man until the full context emerged. His charges were dropped, but he still had the same trauma. And it's going to be some idiot saying, well, how is his fingerprints on the gun? Guess what? Viewers, please don't go in the comments and explain this if somebody asks that dumbass question. Let them sit there and figure that shit out on their own. Just laugh at them when they put that shit up there because some idiot's going to say it. So here we are. Every one of these men had something in common. Skin betrayed them. No action, no guilt, just skin, just cells. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time on the wrong day or coming in contact with the wrong person. We have police officers who are just out there doing their job. We have someone who was heavily intoxicated and was in the emergency room seeking care. And these people were then accused of murder because this DNA is so reliable. The point I'm making is if it can happen to them with full-blown legal teams, public attention, and national scrutiny, what makes you think it can't happen to me or you? Let's go back to Idaho. Let's go back to 1122 King Road. Back to a single skin cell on a sheath snap button found in a house that was drenched in blood so much that blood was pouring out the foundation. No prints, no blood on the strap, no smears, no drag marks, no transfer patterns, just one tiny cell from a man accused of stabbing 4 people and what they describe as a frenzied attack. And earlier in one of the cases that I read to you, they straight up said, no, the DNA is not matching the attack that you said it was supposed to be. If Bryan Kohberger really did this, would the sheath be the cleanest object in the room? If he held it, why is the button the only place that caught DNA? And how did it survive the motion and blood while everything else was contaminated? This fucked up system wants us to believe that DNA equals guilt. But these cases have showed the opposite. Touch DNA can be a coincidence. It can be secondary and it can be weaponized. Ask yourself this. If this government can make one cell look like a confession, how many others have they framed? And I said framed. And I truly stand by framing and planting evidence because, like I said, they've done this shit before I was even born. So let's recap. A blood-soaked crime scene, a single cell of touch DNA, a clean knife sheath, too clean. And now a man sits in jail, presumed guilty, before he ever even spoke. But what if the story that they gave us was just that, a freaking story? What if the sheath did not carry his DNA, but somebody else's agenda? What if the killer did not leave behind a mistake, they left behind a message? Because when you rely on evidence that's this fragile and unreliable, this untraceable, this easy to plant, hard to prove, and harder to question, you don't need the right suspect. You just need the right narrative. And if Bryan Kohberger isn't the villain that they needed, then shit, help us figure out who is. Allow me to say this. I usually don't bring race into my commentary, with the exception of Doug Wilson, when that man said that slaves were treated fairly, and I said, my black ass begs to differ, but that's neither here nor there. I don't do it because this isn't about identity, it's about evidence. But let me be very clear. I am a black woman. I have a black father. I have a black husband. I have black sons, and I have black brothers. We have watched for generation after generation how easily the system will twist a narrative, plant doubt, or throw a body into a cage with the flimsiest excuse to call it justice. So yeah, when I see one skin cell on a sheath with no blood, no drag marks, no motive, I call bullshit and I call it fast. I have seen how this plays out. I have seen how the courts lean on touch DNA and ignore the full story. I have seen men who look like my family locked up for life behind narratives that sounded good, but yet made no forensic sense. So when I say something feels off about this case, it's not a conspiracy. That is instinct. It's a pattern recognition, and it's centuries old. You don't have to be black to feel that something's wrong here. But being black is why I recognize the playbook way before they even finish reading it. There is something that is deeply unsettling about the way that Bryan Kohberger has been positioned as the obvious killer when the actual evidence tells a much murkier story. There is no motive. There is no blood on him or in his vehicle. There is no confession. We are talking about a single skin cell on a knife sheath allegedly left at the scene of one of the most bloodiest crimes in Idaho history. And that DNA didn't even come from blood, sweat, or hair. It came from touch DNA transfer, something that could be moved indirectly through contamination or even during evidence handling or mishandling. Meanwhile, the sheath itself had no blood on it. There's no drag marks. It's first they say it was laying under a victim, and then they say it was laying next to a victim. Nonetheless, these people would have been pouring with blood, and it would have been a blood-soaked mattress, and the sheath has no blood. If Bryan Kohberger committed this crime in a rage, where is the rest of his fucking DNA? Where are the bloody footprints? Where is the torn clothing? Where is the forensic trail that we've seen in other stabbing cases? The evidence that we do have is clean, and it's suspiciously minimal. And yet we're supposed to tie him to not one, not two, not three, but 4 brutal murders. And if I can be honest for a second, you want me to believe that Bryan Kohberger did this? I would say that he'd be a very nice murderer, because he killed all of those people, and someone opens up their bedroom door and sees this man in a mask, and not only did he talk to her in a very calm voice, like our lion ass said, "You're gonna be okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." This man just killed 4 people, and he's talking to her in such a calm voice with his bushy eyebrows, and he let her close the door and he didn't kill her too. That would make him a very nice murderer. This case does not feel airtight. This shit's given scripted. And when you have spent years watching wrongful convictions get built up on junk scene science and tunnel vision, you then start to recognize the signs. The evidence is not screaming guilty. It is saying that someone needed it to look this way just for it to be solved. And Bryan Kohberger, they set your ass up. So many people are out here saying, let it go. He confessed. He did it. This is what it is. Just accept that. I can't let that go. What if that was my father? What if that was my husband? What if that was one of my sons? What if that was one of my brothers? I'm not letting that shit go. At the end of the day, this is why things like this continue to keep happening, because they feed us whatever narrative it is that they want us to believe, and they'll say that people are gullible enough to just believe us, and they let it go. I have been out here in these YouTube streets, and the things I see are actually sickening. I mean, one thing that I've seen that I do agree with is people are saying, as evidence getting released, the poor families, they have to keep seeing these. I absolutely agree with that. What happened to those 4 are very tragic, and I feel so bad for them, and I do feel bad, for their families. But do you know who else I feel bad for? The man that is sitting behind bars with this weak ass evidence talking about he did this, and we're all supposed to believe that. And I actually feel kind of bad for the stupid people that are out there saying this is what he did and you just have to accept that. Why would I? I mean, my thing is, I guess in different cultures, we do different things. It's like, when our people are down, it's like, especially if they ain't do that shit, we gonna fight for you from the outside because you in the inside, and you can only fight but so much for yourself on the inside. I am looking at that as me doing the best I can for Bryan Kohberger at this point, and at least I am bringing attention to the bullshit that's happening within this case. I have never been convinced that this man committed this crime. And my husband made a very good point, and as I'm filming this video right now, I saw that someone put the same thing into my comments on a video. And when my husband said it, I just looked at him and I laughed. He said, who the fuck would take a knife sheath off just to murder someone. He said, baby, he could have just took the knife out. Why is the sheath off? So he disconnected the sheath in order to take the knife out and just left it there. There's so many things that don't make sense, and I'm not buying this story. And it's like, at this point, even if they came out with something else, I'm not believing it, because y'all have fabricated so much shit that anything that y'all do after this point is still screaming, y'all set this man up. And it is what it is. I want you guys to take to my comment section. Let me know how you feel about this lack of evidence. Let me know how you feel about the stories that I gave you of people being wrongfully convicted on this touch DNA, and the prosecution not even using this touch DNA to help clear other people. Let me know what you think about this whole Kohberger thing with this knife sheath that they've given us. And I thank you for tuning in. It's been fun. Remember to always keep it real, and your girl is out.